The state's total education budget will likely be over $70 billion next fiscal year, up a whopping 50% since 2011. California now spends $3,800 more per child than it did during the depths of the Great Recession. That's $14,500 per student this year, compared to about $10,700 in 2011. So why is California still near the bottom in per-pupil spending among states? And why are educators saying they'll have difficulty balancing their budgets going forward? We'll ask Judy Lin, a reporter with Cal Matters, who's written extensively on the price of K-12 education in California.
Additional funding for the Maddy Report made possible by a grant from The Wonderful Company, harvesting health and happiness around the world, and by Kaiser Permanente. Thrive. From the California Channel at the State Capitol and the Maddy Institute, it's the Maddy Report, with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Keppler.
Welcome. Recently, Cal Matters, a nonprofit, nonpartisan media venture that explains California's politics and policies, ran a series on the price of education. We're fortunate to have the reporter who wrote that series, Judy Lin. Welcome to the Maddy Report.
Thank you for having me.
So the last few years, it seems like public schools have been big winners in the governor's annual budget. How big?
They're big winners because we have an increasingly improving economy. We've seen an infusion of extra taxes from Proposition 30, and that's meant that
Proposition 30 was the temporary tax that's going to be supposedly phased out.
Yes,
Okay.
that was approved by voters in 2012, and Jerry Brown campaigned for it. And now this year's school budget is $71.6 billion. That's a 50% increase.
Wow.
From 2011.
That's a big jump. I got a lot of school districts are very happy to see that, I'm sure. And that also means that the per pupil spending has increased quite a bit as well. I was reading your articles. You said that it's increased by $3,800 per pupil. That's a lot of money. It wasn't that long ago that school districts were handing out pink slips. It seems that situation has completely reversed itself. What impact are these bigger budgets having on teacher pay?
They're going up. In short, they're schools that once handed out tens of thousands of pink slips are now trying to lure teachers with bonuses, pay bonuses. They're getting increases in merit raises and trying to make sure that their staff is now that can be rebuilt.
Yeah, because they let these people go, and now they say, gee, we have this need. And my understanding is that the salary has gone up 10.6% in the last 6 years. Now, that sounds kind of good, but that's actually lower than the rate of inflation. And so, yes, but.
Yes.
So how do California's teachers' salaries rank when you're taking a look at teacher salaries nationwide?
We're very much in the top tier. Our average salary, according to the Department of Education, is about $74,000. And if you look at that, that puts us in with New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts. That that's a high-cost area region, and that's what we need to stay competitive.
I mean, I think, is that really what's driving this? That California, most areas of the state, is pretty high cost of living. $74,000 sounds like a lot, but in some places it's difficult to survive on that. Is that what's driving these higher salaries in California?
Very much so. You look at the Bay Area, San Francisco in particular, $74,000 of an average teacher salary may not get you the best housing or in a safe neighborhood.
It's interesting. I have a friend whose children live in San Francisco, and they're living downtown, $4,000 a month in rent. So you start thinking about these $50,000 you're spending just on rent alone. $74,000 doesn't go very far in a place like the Bay Area. So let's talk about California compared to other states in terms of per pupil spending. How are we doing there?
Not as well. We are ranked in the bottom third by different measures. If you look at just the numbers, we're at 36th. Compared to the 50 states in Washington, D.C. If you look at a report that's put out by Education Weekly, we're 46th in the nation in per pupil spending.
That's near the bottom. I mean, California for a long time was kind of near the bottom in terms of per pupil spending. There's more money now, so it's getting a little better, but we're still
very
bottom
much
10.
So. Yeah, and that's because of the regional cost differences, just what it costs to live in California.
Is also what's driving that. What's the breakout of that? So we have high teacher salaries, yet low per pupil spending. I'm thinking that means larger classrooms.
Exactly. If you look at what's happening is you could argue that we don't invest enough in education, that we score low if you look at the Quality Counts report when it comes to how much taxable resources as a state that we spend on education.
It's kind of amazing. When you take a look at the state budget, about 40% of the state budget goes to K through 12 and community college education. That is a sizable chunk. I think that surprises a lot of people. I think a lot of people think, oh, the majority of state spending is on corrections or something like that. That's not the case at all, is it?
No, and that's largely due to Proposition 98, which sets a guarantee for school funding. It's very much a protection measure for schools.
And that's a pretty complicated measure. In Prop 98, I mean, we can get into that, I suppose, but that's a very complicated measure in terms of how schools get their financing, but it's mandated, isn't it?
It is. We passed it in 1988, and it's a complex formula, but the thrust of it is easy. It's just to make sure that we're adequately supporting schools and community colleges.
Yeah, the thrust of it is easy, but the devil is in the details, all right? Well, thank you for that overview of education spending in California. Up next, despite low pure pupil spending, public education still commands a lion's share of the state budget, as we discussed. Where's that money coming from? Next on the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're speaking with Judy Lin, a reporter with Cal Matters, who recently wrote a series of articles on the price of education in California. You know, as noted earlier, California schools are experiencing a dramatic growth in revenue, but where is all this money coming from? Clearly part of this is Prop 30, as we talked about a little earlier. It's had a big impact on state funding for schools. So first, can you remind our audience exactly what the voters approved when they approved Prop 30?
Sure. If you remember, 2012 was a big year. We're still reeling from the recession. Governor Brown went up and down the state across school campuses and campaigned for what was Proposition 30. The premise was simple. It was a temporary tax. We raised the sales tax by 1/4 cent. And then we also increased the personal income tax for 7 years on high-income earners. And it was a progressive model, went from $250,000 to $1 million at progressively higher rates.
Yeah. Now, the sales tax, though, someone argues that's kind of a regressive tax. It falls more harshly, you could say, on lower income people than higher income people. It's a bigger part of their disposable income. So that phased out after 4 years, and then we've got the income tax part of it's going to be going on for a few more years. Then that's eventually going to phase out. How much money was that bringing in?
Sure. Together, the two pots brought in about $8 billion more a year, which is about $1.5 billion came from the sales tax. And this 2016 is the last year we'll have that in effect. About $6 or $7 billion is coming from the personal income tax, and you'll see that starting to phase out by the end of 2018.
Yeah, it's interesting. California, their revenue structure really is focused on personal income taxes. I think about 2/3 of the state's revenue comes from personal income taxes, a lot, and a lot of that, frankly, is on high wage earners.
Yes.
Well, not high wage earners. That's actually a mistake. Probably it's on people who have capital gains, stock market, that kind of thing, when they're selling stocks, and they pay a lion's share of it. So obviously, the improving economy has had a big impact on generating revenue there. But you were saying $8 billion. It's interesting, that figure. We were running about $6 to $8 billion deficits when this thing came in, and all of a sudden we're no longer a deficit. And really, a lot of people can point to Prop 30.
Yes.
That's probably the reason why we're not running deficits, at least weren't before. Now we're running surpluses. So let's talk about the improving economy. The impact it's had on school funding because of Prop 98's minimum guarantee. I don't want to get too much into the weeds on Prop 98. We did a show earlier on Prop 98, and someone was saying that the person who designed it actually put his kids through college explaining Prop 98. It's so complicated. Winchester Mystery House, for those people who drive to the Bay Area and see that on Route 152. So what is Prop 98? How does that exactly work, that minimum guarantee work?
It is a formula that sets an annual funding level for K-12 schools and community colleges. It's determined by 3 measures, and the goal of it is to track with the growth of the economy and with the number of students. So that's the really basic premise. And depending
there's all kinds of complicated formulas, though, to make that happen, right?
Yes, yeah, 3 test cases. One is a percentage of the general fund, one is the percentage of the economy, and the I may get it wrong.
Yeah, well, there's a number of things. The bottom line is you better be a math major if you're going to put this together, because it's extremely complicated. And the other thing, too, is interesting, is that it's based on past revenues, right? So let's say in the previous year you had a good revenue stream, but now in the next year you don't. It doesn't matter. You've got to be paying based on what you received coming in prior. So that just, it makes it very, very challenging. You know, in addition to this new funding, though, there's a new set of policies has been adopted to improve academic outcomes. First of all, I was wondering, how big are the academic differences between various ethnic and racial groups? Is it a big divide?
Very much so. There's what a lot of educators call the academic achievement gap. This is where you see Latinos and African American students on standardized testing having less proficiency and not passing compared to white students. In the latest, most recent batch of standardized tests, less than 1 in 4 low-income and Latino children and less than 1 in 5 African American children scored high enough to be proficient in math.
25%. It means, you know, 75–80% are not proficient.
Yeah.
Those are big numbers. So states try to address this problem by introducing something called the Local Control Funding Formula, or LCFF, a lot easier to write it that way. What is the Local Control Funding Formula? How does it address that imbalance?
Sure. The idea is that we are dramatically throwing out our previous model where the state was very much dictating how to school district how you should spend your money. But Governor Brown, in his effort to push things to the local level, wanted to give discretion to districts. So he created this formula, and it basically doles out a base amount to every school, and on top of that, if it gives additional funds.
So if you have low income or English as a second language, you get a little bump.
Yes.
Extra money. Yeah, it's interesting. The previous way they did it is they actually earmarked the funds. This money's for this money's for that. Now they're saying, use it for whatever you think is appropriate. So apparently school districts then can use it for whatever they want. They don't have to report back to the state as to how they're spending the money. There's a question, is that money getting into those classrooms that need that money?
We don't know, and that is definitely a red flag. You know, as San Diego Assemblywoman Shirley Weber is saying, we can hope that the intent of it is good. But given that it's a new formula, it's only been in a year or two, we don't know what measurable results. Right. And keep in mind, Governor Brown, in his maintaining his philosophy on local control, doesn't necessarily want to know.
Yeah, so that's going to be very interesting. Well, thank you for that explanation of education funding in California. So up next, how are those education dollars actually being spent? Do we really know? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. With California's school budget up more than 50%, why are educators saying that they're having difficulty balancing their budgets going forward? We're talking with Judy Lin, a reporter with Cal Matters, who's written extensively on the price of education in California. So educational administrators are pointing to unfunded pension liability. How big is the unfunded pension liability in K-12 education?
Yeah, at the last marker from last June was $67 billion for unfunded pension liabilities, and this is for about 880,000 currently active and retired teachers and administrators, certified employees.
It's interesting. Pensions are supposed to be, actuarially sound. So actuarially sound, I'll make sure I say that correctly. The money coming in is supposed to be enough to pay for the things going out. How did the system, the teachers' retirement system, get so out of whack?
It was built up over years when the economy was doing well. The state and local school districts basically didn't contribute as much because we were actuarially sound. The economy, the stock markets, their investments were showing strength and
so I figured that would go on forever.
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen. So if anybody invests in the stock market with a 401k, they know it goes up and down. There was an agreement in 2014 with the governor and the legislature on how to eliminate this debt over the next 30 years. What was in that agreement?
Yeah, so Governor Brown and lawmakers passed this long-term payment plan, and it ramps up the school district contributions from 8.25% of payroll to 19.1%.
Whoa, that almost doubles it.
So it's more than double.
And that's by 2020. So
yes.
So that's a big jump. They better have money set aside for that. Not so much the teachers themselves.
The teachers themselves are going up, but it ends up being capped, and the state also is increasing its contributions, but largely this is falling on school districts.
Okay, so what does that mean for the school district's bottom line?
It means that with all the extra money they've been getting from Proposition 30, it's going out it's being set aside to make sure they can pay for these benefits that have been promised to teachers.
Yeah, my understanding is, because reading the LAO report, Legislative Analyst Report, says that the Prop 98 minimum guarantee would bring in about $8.3 billion more by the time this kicks in 2020. So, but a good chunk of that, $3 billion of that, is going to be paying for this unfunded liability. So, a pretty big chunk.
Yeah, 38% was my finding.
Yeah, they're not getting that whole $8 billion. They're going to only get a portion of that. You've written that the situation actually may be worse than that. You're saying that there is a high return on investment assumed with the money being set aside for the pension fund for investments. Can you explain?
Yeah, so the pension system, they project out, there are assumptions of how much their investments will raise and in interest. And
so the idea behind the system is we're going to put some money aside to pay for the retirement, but we're also going to invest that money, and so that investment income will also pay. So the overall cost won't be so much on the retiree.
Yeah, and it's a 7.5% assumption rate in the California teachers.
So they're assuming a 7.5% return on investment on those pension funds.
Yes, yes.
Sounds pretty good. I think a lot of people would like to get 7.5% on their return.
Their 20-year return has been above that, but they are moving to be more cautious. The CalSTRS, the Teachers Retirement System Board, is considering whether or not they should make adjustments to that.
But when they lower the rate of return assumed, that means they're going to have to ask people to put more money in to make up that difference, correct?
Yeah.
I mean, well, in school districts, so then even a bigger hit. Which is what I think the point is of your article.
Yes, yes.
Wow. So there's also, add another problem to the mix here, and that's the issue of retiree health care. How big a problem is that, and is there any money being set aside to deal with those future obligations? So it's not just the pension, it's also the retiree health.
Yeah, so there was a recent report by State Controller Betty Yee that pegged the whole state cost for retiree health and dental benefits at $74 billion.
That's the entire.
Yeah.
That's not just teachers, that's everybody.
That's everybody, all state workers. But to put it in perspective, the state is setting aside $1.9 billion, and she's saying they should actually be putting aside $5 billion.
Wow.
So
20% of what they should be setting aside, 80% is not being covered.
Because of our pay-as-you-go system that we have.
Right. Well, thank you. That's a good picture of the current obligations and how they may determine how education dollars are going to be spent in the future. Up next, Prop 30's temporary tax planned to end by 2020. Will it be needed to be extended to ensure adequate education funding in the future? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. Governor Brown has been warning about an economic downturn for some time. If a recession were to occur, what impact would it have on school funding? We're talking to Judy Lin with Cal Matters about the price of education in California. Although the governor and the legislative analysts are not forecasting an economic slowdown, you just got to look at the numbers. And over the last 5 recessions, the economic recovery's lasted about 68 months. Well, in February of 2016, we're at that 68th month. So the question is, if we get a recession or some kind of economic downturn, what impact is that going to have on school funding?
Yeah, that line that you think of a chart keep going up, it's going to go down and then maybe recover a little bit, so you end up maybe flat. The Legislative Analyst's Office has done a projection to 2019, and they're saying if we go into a recession, the education budget will dip down and then end up right back at $71 billion, which is where we are now.
Right. Okay, so not surprisingly, school groups like the California Teachers Association, the California Federation of Teachers, the state PTA, a lot of them are pushing for an extension of those Prop 30 temporary taxes that are scheduled to expire. So what exactly are they proposing, and how much money would it generate?
Yeah, so they definitely want to let the sales tax portion expire. They think that the
Because that
burden...
impacts everyone.
Yeah.
As opposed to the higher income tax that only impacts the higher income people.
They think they can get more votes that way.
That is usually what happens with taxes, isn't it, right? I mean, tobacco tax, if it affects someone else, I'm going to vote for it. If it affects me, maybe not so much. How much is that going to generate if it passed?
Yeah, and so it's very much an extension of what the governor had done in Prop 30, and so it would just continue to bring in, $7, maybe $8 billion more a year. And most of that would go to schools. Yeah,
it's serious money in the billions. What if the tax isn't extended? Then what?
Then we're very much at the whim of the economy. Because of our volatile budget structure, it will...
A heavy reliance on capital gains, right? Because a big reliance on personal income tax, particularly at the higher levels, and that's capital gains. And so if the stock market goes down, there goes the revenue.
Yes.
Is that basically the problem?
That's basically it.
So let's say we have a double whammy. There is no extension of the Prop 30 temporary taxes, and there's a recession. Then what?
Then we take that double hit. It's about the way we did some forecasting and projections based on LAO numbers is we're looking at a difference of $12 billion. And that's, a good 16%, if not more, of our current spending on education.
A $12 billion hit.
Yeah.
Wow. So what do you think? Do you think that this extension is going to get on the November ballot? And what do you think the chances are that it'll actually pass?
That is up to the voters. I would never claim to know the mood of the voters. But
Any guess?
It is headed for the ballot in November.
Okay.
It's a crowded ballot, but it will be on there. You have a wide coalition of teachers' unions, parent groups, even hospitals and doctors are on board. So they're out collecting signatures
But they've got to
right
collect
now.
585,000 signatures by June 30th.
Yes.
So,
and get it cleared and validated.
Okay, but the point is too that do you think they'll do it? You think they're actually going to hit that target?
Yes. It's very doable.
But there's some opposition out there. This is not going to sail through. The governor, for example, has said that the current proposal has a fatal flaw, that it doesn't have the state's rainy day fund as part of the equation. Is that going to tube this? Is that going to send it down into flames?
No, so in the campaign genius, the organizers of this tax extension went in and modified their rainy day proposal to make Brown happy. It now sets aside money as he intended into the rainy day fund.
And it's also going to be a presidential election year, higher voter turnout, typically more Democrats vote, and then maybe have a better chance of passing. Let me ask you a last issue about school construction. There was recently a $9 billion bond proposal that's being floated. The governor seems to oppose that as well. Why does the governor oppose that?
He is very much of the mindset that the program is flawed. It's not that he doesn't support construction, it's that the way it is constructed allows the more well-organized, affluent districts to get
because they've already got things in the pipeline, on the shelf, ready to go, and the poor districts don't. Is that basically the problem?
Exactly.
Okay. Well, I want to thank Judy Lin from Cal Matters for joining us. If you want to stay current on state and local politics, you can follow us on Twitter or Facebook, or log on to our website at maddyinstitute.org and sign up for Maddy Daily, our free e-newsletter. This is Mark Keppler for the Maddy Report. Thanks for joining us.
The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the California Channel or the Maddy Institute. If you'd like to share your thoughts about the points and opinions expressed on the Maddy Report, visit our website at maddyinstitute.org.